Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors meeting. It is Thursday, 2/20, February, and we do have a quorum. First on our agenda is to approve the agenda. Does anyone want to make a motion on the agenda? Oh, hi, Rich. First by Rich Chang, seconded by Mike Alamang. All those in favor, raise your hands. Very good, thank you. That passed. Next is public comment. I don't see public in the gallery. Do we have anyone online, Deb? Okay, very good. That will close out public comment and we'll move into general announcements. Are there any general announcements this evening? I do have one general announcement. I want to let the board of directors know that Jesse Miller will be stepping down as the chair of the service committee. He is remaining with the board, thankfully. We appreciate all of his hard work. We're very glad for it. In the interim for the month of March, Rich Chang has agreed to take care of that meeting for us. And then we'll move forward with a new appointee as that knowledge becomes available. I'll share it with you. Are there any other announcements by any chance? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. I do have one thing on the consent agenda. Under attendance and members absent, we had Mike listed twice. So we'll take Mike off of the members present and leave him as absence for that January meeting.
I tried.
How did you do that? So that's the only change that I saw. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the agenda with that amendment? Simi will make the motion and seconded by Mike. Seconded by Mike. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you very much for that. And now we move on to our audit presentation. That is Dina Reed, and our guests are in-house with us tonight, Plant Moran.
Thanks, Kathleen. I'll start out with just a few comments before Plant Moran gives their brief overview and presentation of the audit. Just wanted to share a few things with the board. The audit task force and audit report that is in your packet, everything in this packet has been reviewed with the audit task force and the finance committee prior to bringing it to the board. Also wanted to just share a few key highlights in terms of performance. A little bit different than what Plant Moran will share. Mostly I wanted to share that for fiscal 2024, the authority did operate within budget for operating expenses. We were within 3.3% of the operating budget as approved by the board, so we're very proud of that performance. Our assets and net position have all improved in fiscal 2024, primarily due to additional funds received from our millage that started coming in this summer to fund operations for fiscal 2025. We do have a clean audit report. I'm sure that Plant Moran's going to share that, but I at least wanted to acknowledge the work of staff and a great audit process this year. I want to say thank you to Plant Moran for a very smooth audit process. It can be a little dicey sometimes when you have a new auditor and a new finance manager all in the same year, but it went great, and we're very pleased with the results. And so with that, I will turn it over to Plant Moran to share more information about those results with you.
Great. Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Pam Hill, audit partner with Plant Moran. I lead our firm's national transportation practice. So happy to be here with you this evening. I also have with me Chris Gilbert, who is a senior manager with Plant Moran and also is a key member of our national transit practice. So happy to be here tonight. As Ms. Reed said, we are here today to talk a little bit about the results of the audit, very high level. You did have in your packet the financial statements, the federal awards audit, and the end of audit letter. I do want to thank the audit task force and the finance committee. I know we spent quite a bit of time with the audit task force leading into the audit. That pre-audit communication is a real key piece to our audit planning. It helps us to identify risks and obtain views from management. So we really do appreciate the time afforded both at the front end and the back end from that task force, as that was very critical in planning and performing an efficient audit. Also wanted to thank all the help from many people within the organization, Mr. Carpenter, Ms. Reed, Mr. Huber, and the Raymond Consulting Group that also helped with the financial statements. As Ms. Reed pointed out, usually a first year does take a little bit longer, is a little bit more effort. But honestly, I think it went as smooth as it possibly could have. And a lot of that I attribute to the great communication for both your team and ours. And I think that's only going to prove to be even more helpful as the years come. So typically, once the audit's over, we still keep bugging these guys. We stay in touch. We catch up on what's been going on, what's new to help make sure that we're appropriately planning for next year's audit. So we're already kind of starting to think about those things as we kind of put the final bow on 2024's audit. So with that, maybe just to reiterate a couple things, and Chris is going to go kind of high level, just very high level into a couple of the numbers. But overall, clean opinions on the financial statements, also, which basically means you can rely on the numbers as they are stated within the statements. Also, we did not have any findings related to internal controls or related to compliance with your federal spending. So all the federal spending was within the appropriate, what's allowable under the grants and the compliance supplements. So we did test the federal transit cluster, which is the majority of the dollars that the authority spends. I did want to point out there was one finding in prior year, and we did look at that, and that finding was remediated in the current year. So again, kudos to management for looking at that and making the appropriate adjustments. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and let him just kind of give a very brief overview in addition to what Ms. Reed said related to the financial condition of the authority.
All right, thanks, Pam. So just sticking really high level. So at the end of the day, we're looking at the numbers for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2024. So overall revenues were up about 13 million or about 20% from the previous year. And that's exactly what Ms. Reed had alluded to with just the new millage. That made up the bulk of the increase in revenues, which at the end of the day led to the change in net position ultimately of the increase of 15 million, which led you to the just over 116 million in total of net position of the authority. And a few things that we had mentioned as well. So expenses were also up about 3.5 million or 5%. And again, that was mostly due to preparing for initial implementations of the service expansions with the new millage. So at the end of the day, the authority's in a really strong position. Your total liabilities, essentially the authority has no long-term debt, as well as no long-term legacy costs. You're actually over 100% funded on your retiree healthcare. So that's a very strong position. It's not a position that we see often in the industry. We see several other, entities that have a large liability and are still working to fund that. And if you look just even 6 years ago where the authority was at, you were at about 6% funded with that long-term legacy costs, and now you're over 100% funded. So you're in a really strong position with that being said as well. And I think the 2024 was just another good stable year with the strategic use of grant funds. So with that being said, that's really all we have with the financials. The footnote disclosures are essentially the same as last year, just with updated numbers. So any questions before we move on to our other deliverables? I know that was a lot.
Are there any questions from the board at this time? Seeing none, you can go ahead and move on.
All right, I will turn it back over to Pam.
Okay, thank you. We did have just included our end of audit letter. Within the letter are some recommendations, some best practices that we've seen, as well as some best practice recommendations that we've discussed just internally with management. Some information on Inflation Reduction Act, as well as cybersecurity and other items that we've spent some time talking with management about. But happy to answer any questions that anyone might have in anything that was in the letter, or I guess in any of the deliverables that were included in your packet.
Does the board have any further questions? Oh, I think we're good.
Okay, well, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Well, I want to thank Plant Moran for coming in. You came in at the last minute. I think we hired you in November of last year, which speaks volumes to the amount of communication that must have been positive between our management and you all. I can't say how pleased I am to Dina and her staff. Thank you to the audit committee and task force for following up and doing a very good job there. And also to the finance committee, they're sort of our buffer. They look at it even after we look at it. So it's gone through several vetting steps. So thank you to everyone for that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Next step is to, we don't vote on the efficacy of the report, we just vote to receive the report. So would someone like to make a motion to receive the report as it was presented this evening? So moved by Jesse Miller. Any second? That would be Kyra Sims. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Thank you again, everyone. Next is the Ownership Linkage Task Force updates, and that's Mr. Rich Chang.
Good evening, everybody. Just some quick updates here. In regards to the overall legal ownership outreach, we do have a rescheduled date of March 3rd to meet with City Ypsi, with the mayor, and then whoever else that they choose. In addition to the regular every other month updates that Jeff and Matt have with City Council and the mayor and the other crew of governance, they are working on trying to get an in-person with Mayor Taylor. So they're just trying to figure out some scheduling around that so we can actually meet with them in person. And again, we had a really great meeting with Ypsi Township. They are in progress of trying to find that next representative for them to be on the board with us. And I'm sure they'll have some updates when they figure that out. And that's all I got.
Excellent. Does anyone have any questions for Rich? Seeing none, thank you, Rich. Moving on, we're moving to board management delegation policies 4.0 through 4.4. This is not a monitoring function of the CEO, but rather of the board of directors as a whole. If you look at your report, which begins on page 20 of your packet, we've had an opportunity to review it both at the governance committee level, and it was a very successful report. There was one theme that followed its way through the report, and that is in regards to reasonableness, the issue that people are having with the specifically any reasonable interpretation, and what does that mean? I want to share with the board of directors that the governance committee has met with Sue Radwan, our governance consultant. We had a very good meeting, I believe it was the week before last, and we were able to hammer out some stuff with her and get some really good questions asked. She brought in some possible training materials. The governance committee is now going to review that next week. And we're going to hopefully bring it before the board very soon. I'm hoping for March, but it may need to be April, dependent upon the availability of the governance consultant herself, because Thursday nights are hard for her. Outside of that, I'd like to open it up to the board for any other questions or concerns within the report that you might like to have addressed this evening. Seeing none, then we will go ahead. We don't vote on the report because we do the report ourselves, so we should consider the report received. I encourage those who weren't in attendance to take a good look at it, and we can always do follow-up questions later if you should have something that wasn't addressed this evening. That leads us into policy language discussion if needed on 4.0 through 4.4. Are there any board members that have any concerns about the policies themselves that they think the language needs to be changed? Seeing none, we will move on then to policy language recommendations. This is coming from the Service Committee, Mr. Miller, and this is on 2.1.2 and 2.1.3.1.
Thank you, Chair. So the issue brief for this is on page 33 of your packet. The service committee or the policies 212 and 2131 were identified as potentially redundant, and that the work of examining that and providing a recommendation was directed to the service committee. We held a pretty good discussion on that and came up, we did determine that the two policies were redundant and came up with recommendation on page 34 of your packet to remove policy 2131 and to rephrase 212 to say that the CEO shall not operate without providing effective, comprehensible, accessible, and timely information with respect to services offered and safe and respectful conduct. So a little bit of context for why we decided to make that particular change was that the new policy 213, which was recently amended to, that was the policy that board members may remember has to do or had to do with the standards of safety, and there had been debate over whether we actually cared about whether or not the standards exist or whether we actually wanted the practices themselves to reflect the board's, to reflect safe practices. So we rephrased 213 to say, the CEO shall not operate in a manner that jeopardizes the safety of the traveling public. Since 213 now deals specifically with the safety of the traveling public, and that brought us back to 212, which deals with communication. So I just wanted to provide some context on that, how we came to that decision. And we have a recommendation to the board, and we'll love to hear some discussion or any questions.
Excellent. It's been open to the board. Do you have any questions for Jesse or thoughts on the policy as it's been presented? Kyra?
I'm good with the revision. Just a question as far as so with respect to services offered, I'm clear on that's sort of how we communicate our services, our deliverables. But do we have I guess this question is for Matt, do we have a ridership handbook or something as far as the conduct piece, or how has that been evaluated and monitoring reports in the past?
Thank you for the question. We have had a rider's code of conduct for many years. It is posted physically in the terminals. It is in the hard copy ride guide. It is on our website. And it basically covers behaviors. Prohibited behaviors, harassment, swearing, things of that sort. So this policy, I believe, is referring to making passengers aware of our expectations of their patronage while on our service or in our properties.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I just have one. It's just sort of a nitpicky thing. I see that the original language under 2131 said services offered and expected conduct, and we've changed the wording to safe, respectful conduct, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. But when the term expected was taken out, I'm wondering, and again, this is just a thought, do we add safe, respectful conduct from ridership? Or are you all satisfied with safe and respectful conduct, that to assume that it is then on the part of the traveling public, not on the part of, say, the MCOs or staff? Okay, seeing no discussion on that, we'll let that ride, and we'll go back to the original request. Would anyone like to make a motion? I should ask, are we all done with discussion on this right now? All right, seeing no further discussion, would someone like to make a motion about this presentation and how we alter 2.1.2? Yes.
I move that we revise policy 212 to state, operate without providing effective, comprehensible, accessible, and timely information with respect to services offered and safe, respectful conduct, and that we remove policy 2131 entirely.
Very good. Is there a second on the motion? Seconded by Simi. Any discussion on the motion itself? Seeing none, we'll vote. All raise your hands if you approve of the change. 1, 2. And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Next on the agenda is our board annual plan of work. That is on page 35. Based on the feedback that we had last month, we came up with a workable plan. What in your attachment to, what we're looking at is the ends review, which is normal for this year, 2025, is identified as a deep dive into ends review, not just reviewing the policies as we did last month. Sustainability continues to be a concern and a topic of discussion that people wanted. Determining reasonableness, we did just discuss that, and that will be coming forward to everyone. And then there was a suggestion for ownership values, affordability versus property taxes that was raised by a member last month. Additionally, people were interested in funding, federal, state, local, and POSAs. How do those parse out? What do they mean and for our agency and how we receive those funds? Ridership versus coverage, Title VI and equity. We sort of lumped that all together based on discussions that are coming out of the federal government. We're trying to stay within a certain lane right now. And then post-pandemic ridership trends, I think is still beneficial. That was on a lot of people's minds. U of M 2050, land use, and it was also suggested AI, which I have been attending a lot of meetings recently at the university discussing AI and moving forward. So I'm really glad that Rich brought that up last time for us to be thinking about, do we need to have a policy surrounding that? I'm sure that the organization has their own internal policies, but what does the board want to say about AI? Looking at this work plan and education template, are there any changes that anyone like to make, or are you feeling that this is an adequate, more than adequate workload for the next 6 or 7 months? We may not be able to get to it all, but yes, Mike.
Yes, I'm happy with the list, but some of them I think might benefit by some refinement in terms of what specifically we're thinking about. For example, UM 2050, are we talking about their entire 2050, or are we just talking about the transportation part of that? The 2050 plan in total is mammoth, I believe. Do we really want to get into all of it, or just maybe the transportation part of that? Land use, I'm not sure exactly what that was about. I don't even remember. What specifically are we talking about there? And AI, my take on that would be not just a blanket AI education topic, but really how might AI be used at the RIDE, and narrow it down to that.
Agreed. And for clarification, U of M 2050 was specifically with regards to transportation, how their plan is in alignment with what's going on in the city and what's going on with the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority, and what we can do to understand how we can hopefully help coordinate some of those efforts. So it was my understanding that it was just transportation, but if I'm wrong, would someone please correct me? Okay. Any other thoughts from members? Yes, Jesse.
My recollection was regarding the post-pandemic ridership trends. We had discussed taking that off as, you know, as a topic that it was kind of more general, but I had mentioned that my particular interest in it was the post-pandemic ridership trends within our particular ridership. I feel like we've had a lot of discussions about national trends, and I wanted to call out that my particular interest in that is trends, I guess maybe within our own ridership, have we seen changes in ridership in certain geographic areas on certain routes? Different kinds of utilization. So for my part, I would want to call that out to be more specific as like being an internal an internal analysis, not more broad post-pandemic transportation trends.
Does anyone want to piggyback on what Jesse just said? Yes, Mike.
I certainly agree with Jesse in terms of the focus of that, but I'm just wondering if there might be something on a broader level that we could learn something from, that maybe it's something that we're not seeing now or not addressing now, that perhaps other parts of the country or other agencies have and might be useful for us to know about. But I mean, that's just a little bit of a refinement. Maybe there's something there. I really don't know. And I think maybe Matt could kind of determine that.
Any other thoughts? I do see a very good validity to having a both and, with the major focus being on local geography and internal analysis, but also to, once we discover that, to see how it is measuring up to what's happening. I think it's beneficial to have at least some sort of benchmark. It's hard to benchmark yourself. But I do see the value in keeping the focus mainly on what's happening in our geographical area. Would anyone like to counter that? And if not, then we'll go ahead and change that to post-pandemic ridership trends, local, geographic, and internal analysis with some comparisons to sister agencies, but to have the focus be on more internal. Very good. And yes, Rich.
Sorry, I was just looking at my notes on that. The stuff that I had, it was, community demographics was definitely part of that. It was really around like community initiatives that can affect us, whether it's their transit plans, and many new high rises going in. So it was like housing, transportation, et cetera. And then there was a second part of that was just, this is our new reality and our current norm. How do we navigate through this and our future reality? Right.
Yeah, that's good. And also, when I was thinking of land use, there's so much construction going on right now and altering of the landscape of where high rises and apartments are being put in. You've got the construction going on right now at Briarwood, Packard, and State Street is also having a high rise. There are many, and it would be nice to know how that land use is going to potentially impact the ride in terms of ridership and those sorts of things. So I think that might be valuable. Yes, Kyra.
For the funding piece, I think that needs to maybe be weighted heavier than some of the other ones, given the political climate. And I recall, I think Dykema had a memo. Did they do a memo for us years ago about alternate funding, or was that only on bonds? Oh, yeah. Just on the bond issue. So I Jesse, do. Oh. I don't know if this is board work per se, but just if we're talking about funding, I think it could be helpful to have our legal counsel look at what options there would be, assuming a large chunk of federal funding disappears. And I'm sure, this is happening on the finance side too. So I don't want to blow our legal budget necessarily on that, but I also don't want to be flat-footed going forward if that becomes a reality. So even if it's a short term, assuming a transition in 4 years, whatever, we still kind of need to know what that might look like and what alternatives there may be if a large funding source goes away.
Good point. Go ahead, Jesse.
And I'm recalling the presentation we received after, I want to say it was in the basement of this building. Excuse me, I remember then CFO John Metzinger giving us, we had asked for a presentation on bonding or really alternative modes of funding as we were considering whether or not to go out for an increased millage. We initially wanted to take a look at what other funding options were open, and bonding was the big one that I was identified. But I think the presentation could be summed up that we have the capability, we have the ability to issue bonds, but we don't have a great method for paying them off because we don't have a great revenue stream, and that is a requirement of bonding, is that you have a funding stream to then repay those bonds.
I see Dina, you're shaking your head yes. Did you want to add anything to the conversation, or?
Just a very small thing. We did have an update on that, I think about a year and a half ago. So we kind of took the information that had been provided before, kind of basically validated, went back through it, kind of did a little research to see if there was anything that had changed or anything. And we came up with essentially the same results. And Jesse's pretty much summarized, I think, the key crux of it. There were a lot of different points, but the gist of it is the funding source to back the bonds, and the fact that under the Act 51, we can, our millage is only 5 years at a time. Usually when you do bonding, you're talking about something that's 20, 30, you can do short-term bonding, but typically for the larger projects that we'd be looking for funding for, we'd be talking about 20, 25, 30 years. And we can't guarantee that revenue stream from that revenue source, and we haven't found another one. So that is probably the primary issue that makes it more challenging.
Yes, Kyra.
Given that, maybe adding to the plan of work, which I think we talked about this before, but maybe took it off, will have to be advocacy more at the state and federal level, and maybe like the ownership linkage. I'm glad we're doing that local stuff, but if we're really limited on the funding source, then we have to make sure that our concerns and our sustainability and health financially as an organization is top of mind for our representatives.
To be fair, advocacy was on here, but it was something that was addressed last year, and a brilliant plan was brought forth by staff, by Jeff Pfeiffer and all of that. So it's moving along. I think we took it off of here because it was something that's in movement. But if you feel more comfortable having it on there as a placeholder, as a reminder, that I wouldn't be objectionable to that.
No, I mean, I know that this is something that staff and Matt will keep us updated kind of as we go along and as things crystallize, hopefully. So I don't feel the need to add it, just something to keep in mind.
Yes, Rich?
Maybe a suggestion or a potential approach is for the funding ones to actually modify to be funding and risk management. Because I mean, in the end, that is what we're trying to figure out and make sure that we're, as Kara said, not flat-footed.
And to be fair too, when we first started talking about this, there was some concern on some of the board members' part with regards to POSAs and how do we, or not, how they choose what services is that they want, and that comes through their townships and things like that, so that we have a better understanding of why this particular service is on all three of our regular members, Ypsi, Ann Arbor, and Ypsi Township, but why the POSAs have more of like a pick and choose sort of, we want this, but we don't want that. We want this during this time, but not that time. And so that was also another benefit of having this. But if we could expand this just a little bit, because there have been some really great ideas tossed around here, Matt, in terms of that. It sounds like it would be beneficial to the board. All right. Is there any other discussion on this? Yes, Mike.
Of course, the great uncertainty about what's going to happen in Washington and what effect it might have on us is going to be an ongoing problem and maybe an ongoing mystery. And I think it's one that we need to periodically be looking at. I mean, in fact, all the time looking at. But maybe, you know, this is just a thought that I had, you know, maybe as part of the annual business plan, there would be a section on that kind of what if this happens in terms of a cut to particular types of funds and how we would react to that. Because it's certainly an important topic, and it's not going to go away.
No, you're right. It is not going to go away. That would be something for staff to think about and maybe get back with us on if that is an idea, or if it needs to just be something that's done separately, either at committee meetings and whatnot. But we would love to have more information on that. Sounds good. Any other discussion?
Obviously, we're dealing with a lot more risk than we're used to facing in the past
That is-
years, and it's really important.
Agreed, agreed. And I know that we have a lot of faith in our DCO and our DCFO and her team, and I know that they're going to keep us surprised on everything that's going on. Wonderful. There was some discussion about whether or not we vote these in, but apparently we've only voted on it once in like the last 7 years. It's more something that's a fluid document that it can be amended or changed as whatever. So based on this evening's feedback, that will remain the plan. And then we'll kick it off to Matt and his staff to help guide us through that little bit of a monster. Thank you. All right. We're going to go ahead and move on then to innovations and trends, and that is Mr. Matt Carpenter.
Well, it moved much faster than I expected, so I've got to drag this out for a couple hours, so I.
No, you don't.
Oh, I don't, oh, okay, all right, thank you. That was a really good conversation. Thank you for your focus on things that really are important. We actually have some updates for you this evening that are going to answer some of those questions, or at least begin to. This presentation will get at some of those trends, maybe not micro-site specific, but even, yeah, there are some references there in this one. And then later, we'll be providing you with a legislative update where some of the same risks you were just discussing. We'll provide you with a little more background and sort of the latest information there. But for now, I'm here to provide you with the annual Innovation and Trends presentation in one of your policies and the communication support to the board. You ask me to come here annually and tell you about trends and innovations and examples and things that have been trialed and what's going on in the organization. So I'm here to do that. I will say, as I get started, this last year has really been an execution year, particularly with bringing in the millage services. A lot of our time and energy has been focused on delivering what we had promised. So a lot of our focus was on that. However, you will see there's still a lot of change and new ideas percolating up in many parts of the organization. So let's talk about trends for a moment. There are lots of trends. You could look at many things. We tend to focus on some of the ones that most directly affect our business, and you started talking about a few of these a few minutes ago. So quick summary, demographics. The communities we serve are growing slowly. Our growth rate, 1% to 2% a year is not gangbusters. That drives the size of our market. And ultimately determines a lot of what kind of growth we can expect. So it's modest, but it's not a decline, which many other communities, particularly in the state of Michigan, have to contend with. We're also continuing to see it age as baby boomers retire and move into their golden years. So that has an impact on our services and demand for our services as well. Land development, we just touched on. We're still in the sprawl universe. There's a lot of great infill development. We listed several great examples in Ann Arbor just a moment ago, but by and large, it's still a sprawling Midwestern community, very flat, very open, a lot of growth on the periphery. That is a challenge for us, but the infill is definitely a positive. Social economic, we see national trends and local trends sort of mirrored in there. Housing affordability, inflationary cost pressure, social inequality. These are things that the whole country is grappling with in many ways. We see mirrors of these things locally. Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan, relatively affluent, doing well. Ypsilanti Township, less well. This creates what I would characterize as some gentrification pressure. As the housing stock becomes less affordable in Ann Arbor, people look for places to go. That creates social ripples and anxieties in different places. We need to be cognizant of that. We're not necessarily implicated in it, but it's something to be aware of. Technology. There's been, the last couple of years, this presentation's talked a lot about the latest technologies that have come up. And this year, that's definitely artificial intelligence. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But that aside, the big trend we see here is the return of business. The guys in suit and ties are wading into the technology sector in a big way. Consolidation. We see oligopolies developing in some of our major tech platforms. There are some feelings that kind of slows innovation because they buy out competitors and sort of stifle some things, strangle them in the crib, if you will. We're seeing a lot of that business pressure, much more money driven than it is innovation and new stuff driven. So there's a little less out there to pick from, if you will. Environmental, we're just so lucky here in the boring Midwest. It's really cold today, but we don't have raging fires or big floods. I was in Kentucky last weekend and just sort of tap dancing through floods and power outages and ice storms and, but there's no denying more extreme events happening around the world, in this country. They will have knock-on effects for us, liability, insurance, other sorts of things become more problematic. And then, of course, the big one we referred to, not to dance around the elephant in the room, politics and funding. I tried to figure, one word how to characterize, particularly the last 6 weeks. Uncertainty, I think, is the word that I come up with. And I'll speak much more about this a little later today. Great deal of uncertainty about the country's political direction, how that's going to affect our funding, as was raised a moment ago. And the polarization and rawness and tension in our society is definitely evident in many ways. I would say there's almost a fear in many corners. So all of that is definitely there. There's definitely trends in our society that affect us in some ways obvious and others maybe not quite as obvious. There's a question a moment ago about our internal ridership trends, and I think we'd be happy to bring more information, specifically routes and whatnot. Perhaps this slide begins to answer some of that question. Ridership is growing, up 10% overall, 12% up on TheRide, 2% up on the Go Pass, which is the downtown thing. So there's a difference there, and I'll talk about that. We're presently at 75% pre-pandemic. I know we've given you different numbers, and that's kind of been a bouncing target, but we're pretty comfortable with this one. D2A2 is a growing service. A-Ride and FlexRide are up 3%. We're actually starting to have crowding problems, and this gets back to some of those, the implications of some of those specific developments down at Maiden Lane and Plymouth. Lots of development, for a neighborhood that hasn't seen a lot for many years. You now have a huge apartment area. The buses coming down Plymouth are full by the time they get there to that huge apartment complex. And we're having what we call pass-ups, which is a euphemism for we can't fit you on the bus, so the bus leaves you behind. And I've been clear with George, this is not an acceptable situation, so we need to get a handle on it. It's a good problem to have, better than the alternative, but still not an acceptable degree of quality of service. But that's not the only place we're starting to see this. So having that is a blessing and a curse, because the alleviations for that, we can fiddle with our logistics, retraining bus drivers a little bit to begin to alleviate that. But fundamentally, you need to add supply to match the demand, and that comes with a cost. Ridership. This goes back to a higher level. A couple of years ago, we produced this graph that shows you sort of post-pandemic trends, I think through 2022, and then showed you our forecast, if you will, about what we thought ridership might do as the long-range plan rolls out. This was part of our millage discussions. Admittedly, you haven't seen this graph in a while. That green star is where we are right now. We closed the books on 2024 a few months ago. Dina's team and Andy were furiously putting in the NTD numbers, and I was pestering them about, hey, where's the numbers? I got a PowerPoint I got to give to the board. It was all for this star, Andy. That's green star. That's where that went. It's reassuring to see us kind of on target. This is where we expected. So that's reassuring. I think the thing that gives me pause about declaring victory is that it is definitely a check-shaped recovery coming out of the pandemic for us. It's got a bit of a tail on it, and it's going to be 2028 really before we expect to get back to a pre-pandemic level of ridership. And that comes down to a whole host of factors, some of which I'll talk about in a few moments. Oh, look, maybe this one. A lot of significant changes in the travel market. The demand for our services has morphed and is continuing to change. The work from home thing definitely has an effect on our commuters market. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And even that is still shifting. Even this morning, I was hearing yet another, oh, everyone's going to have to go back to the office next week kind of news broadcast, which then gets walked back in the afternoon, and it's kind of the pendulum swinging back and forward. So it's really hard to tell where that one's going to settle. The other one we'll talk about is the delivery culture and less shopping, which has a surprisingly strong effect on our ridership. So the Ann Arbor DDA is working on a circulation study they hope to release later this year, and it's going to be a really good report, a lot of juicy sort of numbers in there. But this is one I wanted to share with you from that report. It's about a year old, so the numbers stop January of 24. But this shows you the pre and post-pandemic trends of visitorship overall to downtown Ann Arbor. And the results speak for themselves. They're right there. It was a huge hit to what's going on in downtown Ann Arbor. There are other graphs I didn't include in here, but you can see a shift in when people are coming to downtown Ann Arbor. Used to be more people coming, before noon. This is your 9 to 5 crowd. This is people showing up to work. There are fewer of those people now. There are more people showing up after 5 p.m., particularly on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So as a trend, it's fairly apparent, and it's starting to be openly spoken about, that downtown Ann Arbor is becoming more of an entertainment district than it is a business district. And perhaps it's been that way for some time, but that trend seems to be accelerating. And I keep remember Vogel's locksmith shop, the key shop that was down there. You don't see a lot of just businesses like that. You see a lot of restaurants and bars, and a business is a business. I mean, no disrespect to them. But as we also see, there are implications for vacancy rates on the commercial side of things. This is much more recent. This is from the Swisher Realty report from last month. And the line to pay attention to, I think, is the green one here. And you can see it bouncing up at 15% vacancies. Now, this is citywide for the city of Ann Arbor. That's all they provided. But I got to point out to you, that's as high as it's been since the peak of the Great Recession, just to put that in context. And we mentioned this last month. You drive around town, you see a lot of for lease signs. You see a lot of retail shops. You can't even see the offices maybe further back from the road or higher up. You can see it here. So this is the work from home element and what it means for commercial real estate. Another trend we're keeping an eye on, I haven't heard much about it recently, is refinancing the mortgages on commercial real estate. That a lot of the money used to borrow money to buy these buildings was done pre-pandemic, and those things are all turning over at higher interest rates that we have today. There's been some concern that that could cause a fairly severe economic disruption as all those mortgages, as you will, come due. Haven't heard about that in a while, perhaps Dina has, but I don't think that's gone. I think it's just kind of gotten buried under all the other things that we hear about these days. Shopping and delivery trips, this is something Forrest brought to me. I didn't fully get it, frankly, at first, but one thing I heard was that major disruptions like a pandemic don't necessarily create a new trend, but they may accelerate trends that are already there. And shopping from home, Amazon was big before the pandemic. It's enormous now. And the sheer amount of delivery vans you see everywhere, they're everywhere. That has an effect on a couple of things. First of all, there's fewer people on our bus going to shop. You can get your groceries delivered now. But more importantly, there's fewer workers going to those retail stores. That gets back to the vacancy rates. So a good chunk of our ridership were people commuting to work at retail establishments and other things that maybe now that delivery is happening online. There's a very large Amazon warehouse down Carpenter Road, I think along US 23 south of US 12. If you go look at it, it's a couple football fields in size. Shifting jobs from retail environment in a downtown to a giant warehouse on the outskirts, it's very challenging for mass transit to serve. It's far away from our service area. The way their shifts are set up, they're working overnight when we're not even running. It's a challenge for us to serve that kind of thing when it moves out of our traditional service areas. U of M, no presentation on trends in Ann Arbor would be complete without a discussion of the university. I was speaking with some of their personnel the other week, mostly back to pre-pandemic levels of activity on campus, but remote work continues, very position by position as I understand it. Most people have returned most of the time, but in the meantime, staff has grown at the university. So even when people are working from home, there are simply more people. So they're actually having parking challenges again. Anecdotally, the hospital parkade has filled up on certain Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays bad enough that people have missed appointments. They're thinking about another deck. At the same time, they eliminated about 300 parking stalls over by the old lumber yard on Hill Street. And as you see those dormitories go up, first of all, they look good. They're going up real quick. I'm impressed. That will inject more people within walking distance right into the heart of our service area, so that's good. But the elimination of parking creates its own challenges. So what are we doing about a lot of these responses? Well, a lot of it is that, we have competitive advantages in our mass transit niche. We can, no one can compete with us in terms of the cost to get you into downtown. We are cheaper than anybody. So we focus on doing what we do best, and this is a lot of fundamentals, and yes, some innovation in that. A lot of customer satisfaction and service delivery things that we'll be talking about in a minute. I want to give one example that George mentioned to us the other day. Would you call it rattle and roll?
Yeah, rattle and roll initiative.
So you've been on a bus, it hits a bump, and everything kind of rattles and shakes. George and his crew are taking each bus out, making things rattle so they can find it and tighten it up and fix it. So it's a small thing, but it fixes one of those niggly little things that bugs customers so that it's not so distressing. And I compliment him on that degree of precision. Obviously, a lot of our new services, that was a big deal this year. Our major projects moving forward slowly, but assuredly, and I'll talk about those in a few moments. And then, of course, there's a lot of innovations and new approaches. But before I go into talking about that end of it, I wanted to take a pause and see if there are any initial questions from the board about the big picture trends that I was just talking about.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask at this moment? Jesse, and then Mike.
I have a couple of questions. Do you know if the circulation study is looking into where all those trips into Ann Arbor are originating from? Like how many are from within our service area is kind of what I'm interested in versus people from outside the service area. I imagine that's a harder thing to pull. You can't just count cars, but
I don't know if the circulation study was looking at that, but the city usually maintains a certain origin destination matrix, and SEMCOG has similar information, albeit at a very aggregated scale.
just thinking about, in addition to the time, we make an inference from when people are coming in as to what their intention is or where they're coming from. But so I think that could have implications for us. If there are a certain number of trips that are generated within our service area, can, we we want to know that we're serving those, those needs as well. My second question is, there's a lot of very Ann Arbor-centric information there. What do we know about similar types of trends in Ypsilanti and Ypsilanti Township?
Don't have as much readily available trend data on Ypsi and Ypsi Township as we do in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor is simply larger and has, more resources to put into the data side of things. So we have less insight, I think, into the trends going on in the Ypsi and Ypsi Township areas.
How do you think that can be addressed? I mean, because Ypsilanti Township is, the second largest municipality in Washtenaw County, and then we have Ypsilanti, and they are, I don't think that we should be necessarily making decisions for those municipalities based on information about Ann Arbor. So I'm wondering, what I know that Ypsilanti, the city of Ypsilanti certainly is looking into their own, their own transportation issues.
Yes.
I guess I'm wondering to what extent that information was sought. Like, did you ask the economic development officer or the person in charge of economic development at the city of Ypsilanti?
Not as such. I think our website review, sort of keeping abreast of the things that have been discussed. And I think the point is well made. Going forward, we can certainly seek out more proactively information from those areas. But I also want to be direct with everyone. There's a dog and there's a tail in this situation. Ann Arbor is the big generator of travel demand in our service area. So we have a mission to serve all parts of it. I don't want to understate that. It's never out of our mind. But in terms of growing ridership and the trends that really drive that, Ann Arbor, we tend to focus on that, partially because the data is there, but that's also where the data makes the biggest impact to our operations. But we will definitely, going forward, be more proactive in looking into what information we can.
I do think that would serve well. I mean, we are an interconnected community.
Absolutely.
And even if people living in Ypsilanti are traveling to Ann Arbor to work, that is one aspect of their life, and there are a lot of other, but people are circulating within their communities and within their, more, closer region. And I think that's trends that I would hope that we'd be paying attention to.
Certainly, going forward. Noted, thank you.
Yes, Mike.
Bless you.
Yeah, Matt, thanks. I've got a couple of questions on a couple of your exhibits. First one on ridership. I think I know the answer to my question. And my question is, like you have 10% fixed route growth overall. I presume, it doesn't say what the base is. I'm sure it's not this year versus last year. It's probably using 2029 as the base, the pre-10 last year of pre-10.
I thought it was year to year. Yeah, it was year to year.
So this last year, we've grown 10%.
Yeah.
That would be good to include in here too.
Okay,
'Cause
I apologize
I
for
made
the
the wrong
confusion.
assumption.
Yes.
Your
Yeah,
answer
I
is-
think all of these numbers are year to year, other than the 75%.
For this last year?
Yes.
Okay, great. That's a lot better than what I was assuming, and I'm very happy to hear that. Second question, on the downtown Ann Arbor visitors, something I hadn't noticed before. The trend was down prior to the pandemic, significantly down trend. What's going on there? What was going on before the pandemic disrupted everything?
I couldn't say. Perhaps that'll be in the study when it's released. I'm not sure.
If Susan Polly were here tonight, maybe she would be
I'm
able
sure
to
she would
know.
have
Yeah.
insights, yes.
Okay.
I'm a poor
But
substitute.
that's very interesting to see that, and it's not necessarily good news.
Any other questions from board members? Seeing none, you can go on with the second
All
part.
right, so let's talk about the fun stuff, innovation. I've defined this for you before as novelty that works, and I'm sticking with that definition. It can be new or new to you, but it has to be effective. It's got to work. It's got to produce a positive result. It can be technology, a process, even a mindset, frankly, can reduce or unleash a lot of productivity. And it comes down to change. And every organization and every individual has a different risk tolerance and a different amount of change that they can absorb, and we're trying to make sure we are cognizant of that as we go along. Some organizations, particularly pre-pandemic, particularly the larger transit agencies, were hiring a high-level position called the Chief Innovation Officer. And I never really agreed with creating a position like that, because my sentiment has always been, why wouldn't we try to get everybody on board with innovation and change and empower them, give them clarity of expectations so that they know, what to do. And I think we've managed to achieve that at TheRide. I don't mean to talk about all of the italicized things that we've been doing over the last year or so that I think have made benefits. What I wanted to focus on here is the real shift, maybe from, 10 years ago. I would say we had a very risk-averse staff culture. There was not a lot of proactive change. Now we have a very different situation with staff up and down the line making changes so fast that frankly, sometimes every year, it's a little challenging to pull this PowerPoint together because I have to go ask them, well, tell me what everything you did, and they got to remember everything they did. I don't slow them down by asking them to keep a running list. So there's so many good things that have been going on throughout the organization. I was surprised the other week, I pulled into the garage and there was a small tractor being delivered with a big bucket scoop and a snow revolving brush on the front for snow. I'd completely forgotten we were going to do that. That was like a year or two ago in the budget, but it was a staff-driven thing. And every year, in the last couple of years, I've watched people out with shovels moving snow, moving mulch under the gardens. There's productivity for you. It's a simple thing and maybe not the most revolutionary idea, but it was a bottom-up driven idea and a good example. So in trial or near development, lots of stuff going on here. I'm only going to hit a few highlights. Snow tires. They're not snow tires, but they are different tires. And we're excited by the preliminary results. They seem to be working on the buses that they've been installed on. The Throne, this is the MCO Super Porta-John down at the Ypsilanti Transit Center. This is a really appreciated feature for the MCOs. As we've increased the amount of buses going into the YTC, there's still only 3 bathrooms, only 1 staff bathroom. You only got 5 minutes between arrival and departure, and you all show up at the same time. That bathroom, not always available. So the Throne, we killed a couple birds with one stone there, satisfied a need from our drivers, and made friends with the city of Ann Arbor because they needed someone to help them out with a grant, so they get a bulk discount. So we picked up one. My hope is that it's successful enough that we might be able to work with MDOT to be able to do something similar at our park and ride lots at US 23 and Miller and 14, because those are other areas that our drivers are sorely in need of relief. You're going to see some new advertising work coming out from Jeff's group in a little while, a little edgier, a little funnier, but a first part of changing how we present ourselves to the community. Look forward to you guys seeing that stuff. The advocacy work has been mentioned. We're going to get a bus lane next year. Surprise. On State Street through campus, dead center. I don't want to take credit. This is largely a university-driven and city project. We are chipping in. We're happy to ride in on coattails. I don't have pride. We're going to get a bus lane for us and U of M. That's happy for me. However it happens, we're fine. I want to talk about the IT Needs Assessment and Steering Committee. So this is more process innovation. We got a lot of industrial software in our organization. Business-oriented, manpower planning, scheduling, payroll, all sorts of things. And if I'm perfectly honest with you, it's a patchwork of legacy systems. We've been patching it up better over the last 10 years, but it is not a purpose-grown software architecture. And I think the innovation here, and I credit to Mike Blackston in the IT department and Dina's leadership here, taking a step back and saying, maybe we need to do better as staff. We can't just react to when a piece of software is suddenly unsupported and we've got to replace it quickly, because that's just another Band-Aid on top of Band-Aids. So we took a step back, did an IT master plan, looking at all the software we need to do. We've struck a steering committee that's going to work through logically, how do we build the kind of software architecture that's going to last us going forward into the future. Yes, this includes eventually replacing the real-time information systems for our customers, as well as our sort of back office stuff. So that's a process innovation, but I think an important one worth mentioning. And you will see capital budget items related to software, and that's what it's driving. Authorized and in planning. There are incremental plans, changes, and moonshot innovations. I'll talk about both of them. Incremental is important because good moonshots are few and far between, going to be honest with you. But the cumulative effect of many small changes really adds up over time. And that's why I'm so happy about the culture of innovation in the organization. We have staff making changes on lots of things every day. Here's a few examples of things we're working on, maybe the higher level ones. And I can't tell you, how excited I am about that last bullet, getting rid of the old real-time information system for customers. That system has seen its best days. So I'm excited about the future there. Moonshots, these are the big risks, longer timelines of greater investments of money and time to make them happy. They're all anchored in our long-range plan. There's nothing in here that we haven't put into a blueprint and vetted very thoroughly. They're part of our critical path, if you will. The terminals, bus rapid transit, garages, zero emissions buses fall into this category. The regional park and ride, Jesse was mentioning, where people are coming from. One of the things that was interesting, sort of take a step back in terms of trends, with U of M 2050, we heard from the university that they're actually getting a lot of pressure from their own students, faculty, and staff who cannot afford to live in Ann Arbor, or just there isn't housing here. They're commuting in from further afield, and they're annoyed that there's no accommodation for them to bus in. And so the university is interested in working with us on regional plans, and I was really glad to see that. So Forrest and his crew are leading some plans to take what was really only 2 pages in the long-range plan and turn it into a more shovel-ready, executionable kind of thing when funding arrives. A little further down the line, some things we're looking at, artificial intelligence we've mentioned a couple times. We're learning on this one too. I don't want to try to suggest to you I know a lot about AI. I do not. But we think that its greatest benefits are probably going to come in staff productivity and the customer experience. Not just chatbots for customers, but things able to anticipate and provide information to customers before they really know they need it. Everyone lives off their smartphones. Let's lean into that, if you will. something Jesse has mentioned in passing to me recently. We are hearing more interest in services further afield than our traditional core service area. I would say countywide is not an unreasonable way of expressing that. Those are still very preliminary conversations. I'm not entirely sure how they jive with your end statements or the role of this organization, but we're being good neighbors and talking to some of the folks in the out county areas who are interested in our expertise and perspectives on this space. So I'm a good neighbor and helping out where we can, but it is not something we're making a significant effort in at this time, but we're keeping an eye on it, if you will. And non-emergency medical transportation is something we've bumped into occasionally with numerous hospitals and lots of medical facilities here. I do think this need is going to keep coming back up, and people will look to us eventually, and eventually we'll get asked point blank if we would step into this space. This is very different. We do not provide a service like this before, but we could. We just haven't yet. So this is something we're sort of keeping an eye on. So I want to talk a little bit more about judging innovations and sort of our batting average, if you will, over the last couple of years, and some updates on some things we've touched on before. You may remember me describing the Gartner hype cycle to you a few years back. This is a tool developed in Silicon Valley to help venture capitalists figure out when the best time to invest would be. You get a lot of pitches coming at you. Some of it's hot air, some of it's substance. How do you know the difference? And we see a lot of parallels in the hype cycle with the things we encounter and the enthusiasm we encounter for various ideas. I wanted to provide a little bit of an update here, sort of where things stand with a couple of key technologies and innovations we bump into over the years. So first, we'll start in the very early stages, autonomous buses. There are no autonomous buses. We don't have cars that can drive themselves yet, and buses, frankly, are harder. Is that person running towards the curb a potential collision, or just someone flagging down the vehicle? Computer's got a long way to go before it can do that. There are some what salespeople will claim are first generation technologies available, but they're really nothing more than driver assistive things, adaptive cruise control, lane departure warning things that are very common in most cars today. It's not AI. It's not a bus that drives itself. I speak to most classes of new bus drivers to thank them for joining our team. And recently I've gotten some of the younger ones asking me, hey, is this going to be a stable career? Am I going to lose my job in 10 years when robots are driving all the buses? And I have to tell them, well, I don't expect to see a bus driving itself during my career. I think that would be ambitious. So that's still at a very early stage at the beginning of the cycle. Moving along, free fares, something we've bounced off of once in a while. That one seems to have been sort of over the crest and is maybe starting to slide down. We're watching a few cities, Kansas City, Boston, a few others that are experimenting with this. It really more and more looks to be mostly just a financial economic decision. It's not a revolutionary thing. It's just a cost you need to pay for. You've eliminated some of your revenue. How are you backfilling that? Kansas City is doing it off of COVID relief, which will run out. I think Richmond, Virginia doing the same. They will not have a capital reserve by the end of it. Boston is doing it. The mayor there, in very like one maiden line, but they seem to be transferring money out of the municipal budget into the MBTA budget to backfill this. So this is innovative in some ways. In other ways, it's just moving money from one pocket into another. The question still becomes, are those solutions sustainable? Is there a revenue stream that can really make that happen? If there is, maybe there's something to it. If not, those communities are going to have a tough couple of years coming up. Battery buses. This one has been a rapid slide down the back end of this graph over the last 12 months. Where the hopes and aspirations were, and we remember talking about it back in 23 when we were working on our work with Stantec, a lot of excitement, frankly, a lot of pressure for transit agencies to buy into this. It's been a bad year for battery electric buses across the country. The main startup, Proterra, went bankrupt early last year. As of right, and this has left
The library will close in 15 minutes. The internet stations will automatically shut off at 7:55 p.m. Please make any final copies at this time and take all materials to be checked out to a self-check station or to the circulation desk by 7:55 p.m. Thank you.
I was going to talk over him, but he was too loud. When the Tesla of battery electric buses, Proterra, went bankrupt, it left a lot of transit agencies in the lurch. Austin has about 46 of these vehicles out of about 100 battery electric ones, roughly an eighth of their entire fleet. They've had to mothball it. They're just not running them. New services have been delayed because they can't get support and because the bankruptcy has disrupted parts supply, warranties aren't functioning. City of Edmonton up in Canada had bought 60 of these vehicles. They are now attempting to sue the remnants of Proterra for, at last check, $82 million Canadian for damage. That's 50 million American. And that fleet is also inoperable and had been inoperable for a good chunk of the time prior to the bankruptcy. Other manufacturers, more stable manufacturers, their vehicles are doing much better, but we are seeing a lot of challenges installing the charging infrastructure, the range. There was range anxiety. You remember us talking about that in the discussion there. Those problems have not gone away. They've gotten worse. Almost everyone is reporting real range limitations, buses that can stay out for the morning rush hour, for example. Obviously, there's a range. Some areas are doing better. I know Foothills Transit in California has managed to do some things with in-street induction charging, and we're talking about some opportunities there ourselves. But it has not been a good year for battery electric buses. The current generation, I would say, is right at that crux where either it's going to begin turning around and finding a niche, or it'll be abandoned. And I mean, this generation of the technology may be abandoned. There may be better batteries in the future, and it's a whole new ball game at that point. But they've had a bad year, not going to lie. Hydrogen, pretty much exactly where we expected it. The technology is fine, as we discussed before. All of the issues there are in the supply chain and the economics. How do you manufacture hydrogen fuel? Can it be done without creating more greenhouse gases than you save? Can you get really green? This is where the trends of politics are coming in. The incoming Trump administration, the Trump administration is, as I'll talk about later, not sympathetic to climate change funding. And they're taking quite a chunk out of the EV funding market. So far, they haven't gone after the hydrogen side of things, but there are tax credits that are really key to making hydrogen a viable commodity in the short term. If those don't materialize, we could see some severe challenges with sourcing the fuel. Ride hailing that's interestingly, we're talking Uber and Lyft, that's really matured. It's gone through a lot of growth spurts. We've seen consolidation. We've seen prices go up. It's pretty much eliminated the taxi industry by and large. It's matured into a sort of commodified product. We use it for FlexRide. Makes sense in low demand situations. It's a version of Dial-A-Bus to us. But it's kind of a known quantity, and you still see some communities experimenting with it. As we talked about in LAC earlier this month, you see the costs getting out of hand, but the industry is learning how to anticipate and grapple with those. And then finally, sort of off the end there is that critical path chart again. I put that there to just let us all know that all the things there are much more mature, lower risk moonshot strategies. The things we're working in there are not really on the hype cycle. They're much further along in the maturation. So in closing, I know you're all waiting for that. In closing, we're doing fairly well on the innovation and execution side of things. This year has really been more about the implementation, but I think we're still making good headway on change, both evolution and revolution. if you will. We're also sort of finding the organization's limits. Sometimes I want to really put the accelerator down and I'm pestering Forrest or Dina, could we do this? Could we do that? And you kind of learn to gauge reactions in terms of, can I really ask them to do more than they're already doing? Or are we at risk of sort of overloading ourselves and exceeding our organizational capacity? I think we're running in a really good spot right now. It's definitely a high workload, not gonna lie, but I'm hesitant to throw any other logs on the fire at the moment. But we're working on our next business plan, on priorities, reshuffling the deck a little bit. And I'm hopeful that innovation in the future, maybe with AI, maybe with some other things, can help increase productivity even further without, asking staff to do a whole lot more with less. So with that, thank you. Happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Matt. Does anyone have any questions for Matt? I think you're good to go. That was an excellent presentation. You've given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure as we move forward from here, if people have questions, they're welcome to contact you, and I'm sure it can be brought up again in committee if there's anything else anybody would like to discuss. Very good, thank you. We're going to move into our operational updates. That is our quarterly one financial report for fiscal year 2025, and that's Ms. Dina Reed.
Thank you. In your packet, you have the fiscal year 2025 first quarter financial statements, issue brief and statements. It starts on page 60. I'm just gonna preface this by saying we're only a quarter in, so it's a little early to identify any new trends that would be different than budget in the fiscal year. I would certainly share them with you if we were finding any. But overall, things are trending pretty much where we expected. We've got a few ups and downs within the operating budget on page 62, but we're running basically within a few percentage points from what we budgeted for at the end of the first quarter. Like I said, some ups and downs, but nothing really notable in terms of something we're concerned about in terms of as the year goes on, things kind of evening out and looking at the operating budget. If any of those trends do start to appear or we have concerns about, things that will continue throughout the year, we will certainly let you know as we move through the year. But all in all, a good first quarter. Revenues are pretty close to budget. Expenses are a little bit under budget, so net impact is favorable for the first quarter. Moving through the report just a little bit further, there's a middle section there that talks about federal pandemic relief utilization. Staff has been discussing kind of some of the formatting of this report and maybe making some recommendations in the future about just changing some of the information that we're providing. So innovation information coming on that in the future quarters, I expect this year. Overall, moving on to the balance sheet, as discussed a little bit in the audit, fiscal year 24 ended favorable. At the end of the first quarter, we're still in a very favorable position when it comes to net position. No major changes or swings. We are all of our reserves are complete and intact. We haven't used any reserve funds in the first quarter. And nothing has actually reduced since the end of the fiscal year. And our months in operating reserve are above the target, slightly above the target, which is where we like to see them. So again, good financial performance relating to cash flow and the funding and reserve. A little bit further down the page on the balance sheet under investment summary, just want to note, you see some movement there with some of our investments that were either called or had matured. They were reinvested at higher interest rates than what we had been receiving in the former investment. But there's been no shift in investment strategy or the types of investments we're making. We're still investing in treasury bills, agency bonds, treasury notes, things like that. Same investments we've made in the past, just getting a little bit more favorable interest rate on those longer term investments. So that concludes the key points of the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dina. The board have any questions? And I'm assuming, Mike, do you have anything?
Well, I do want to just make a couple of comments. We've seen with the auditors, we've seen with Dina's financial reports, not just this quarter, but for many quarters, we have a very, very solid financial organization. We have a very, very solid financial rock in our balance sheet, and the continued operations are coming out just as we expected. We are now reflecting 2 quarters of funding under our new increased millage, and that's gone very well. It's gone like as expected. Dina said, well, this is only the first quarter. That's true, but it's a quarter that is really just continuing what we've seen in the past. So I think we should feel very good. And we have a solid financial organization and a solid financial basis. So we are very lucky compared with other transit authorities, as I'm sure that Matt and other people can attest to.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any comments or questions from another board members? Seeing none, we'll close it out. Thank you, Dina.
Welcome.
Next on our agenda is the CEO report. Back to you, Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you. 2 things I'd draw your attention to in the written material. First of all, congratulations to the planning group, Forrest's team. They won a grant. We will be hosting a BRT peer exchange in about half a year. 2 communities that have already built bus rapid transit will visit us and share their learnings from that. So we look forward to sharing more information about you as the event begins to develop. And then on page 65, congratulations to Jeff and his team for the Equity Day presentation. We're really happy to bring forward the Rosa Seat concept in honor of Rosa Parks. This is something that's becoming more common across the transit industry, where you actually, there sometimes important moments happen on the bus, and sometimes from a societal perspective that happens. And obviously Rosa Parks in 1955 was probably the most obvious one. And honoring her by designating a seat, I think is a great way to do that. Just a reminder to people, maybe when they're not expecting it, that they're kind of following in similar footsteps in a path she blazed. So thank you to Jeff and his team for making that a reality. And I'm happy to take any questions from the board about the remainder of the report.
Rich?
I just had one. I'm sorry, I can't remember, but I appreciated the update, especially regarding the YTC and the potential challenges with technical and legal reviews. I couldn't remember, are we getting any federal funding for that? Because I thought we had like a carve out, but I couldn't remember if that was at federal or state level.
We currently have a $7 million earmark, congressionally directed funding from Congresswoman Dingell. For that, we also have a $300,000 funding from Senator Peters, which Forrest is using right now to pay for the consultants that are doing the work. $7 million is for construction. It's not as much as we will need, and we do intend to continue to pursue other competitive grants.
Very good. Mike?
On page 66, there's something that you really included before, and I hadn't occurred to me to ask this question. When it says stopgap bus replacement, that implies something that's short-term and it's going to be better after that. What are we expecting after this stopgap?
Dina, do you want to explain what gap we stopped and why we no longer have to stop the gap?
I think we're familiar with why we have it, but what's next?
Sure. Dina?
Sure. So the stopgap that we have is with a cooperative procurement with state of Washington. So we had an issue with our former provider, our bus provider. We've actually negotiated an agreement with them to amend the agreement that we had, where they will be reimbursing us or compensating us for a good portion of essentially what we identified as our loss related to them not being able to supply buses. So that's a favorable development on that front as well. But also, we entered into an agreement with Washington State to purchase new buses in the interim. We also have the opportunity to buy buses off that contract related to the Low-No grant as well. So there's that opportunity. If that funding does come through, we have that opportunity, and they are named in our grant application. So we have not gone out for a new bus procurement because we are utilizing a contract, like I said, a cooperative agreement, which we could purchase those buses off of. So we didn't have to delay any bus purchases due to the kind of pulling out of the former manufacturer out of the United States market. So good progress there.
At roughly what point in the future will we have to be having something different from
So when,
what you've already talked about?
right, so what we're kind of waiting for right now, like I said, we have the option to continue purchasing off of that, but that does have a shelf life. We are currently evaluating when we want to do that, when it makes the most sense for us to do that. Part of what we're waiting for is to see what's going to happen with the Low-No funding, because we have already identified manufacturers to work with that funding, and that would be, those manufacturers are who we would work with for 2 to 3 years. So we wouldn't need to procure anything new until after that. If the Low-No funding continues to be hung up, that we're evaluating right now, does it make sense to start thinking about doing our own bus procurement, or does it make more sense to stay on this contract for a little bit longer? And it really comes down to whether we think we can get any better pricing and or any changes that could happen with the Washington State contract that would be out of our control, since we're not the primary owner of that contract. So we're weighing the risks and the costs, and still haven't determined exactly when we think that would be a benefit to us.
Okay, thanks, Nina.
You're welcome.
A couple other quick questions, Matt. You're going to have this BRT. You said a couple of cities are going to come in and talk about their BRT. Could you share what cities it is?
I don't believe they've been selected
Oh.
yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't have teased you like that if I had known.
Okay.
Sorry.
And my last question is, how did, the Rosa Parks idea, I think, was wonderful. How did the riders react to that?
Really positively. I think all the traction we saw on either social media or some earned media out of it was really positive. I do think a couple of the seats were inadvertently sat in, so I don't really think there's much we can do on that, but overall feedback was positive. I think that's something we'll maintain moving forward in the future.
And a lot of positive things were heard right on the bus, and people came across them.
Yeah, as far as I know, we didn't receive any negative feedback, so I think everything was really positive and appreciated.
Okay, thanks. Great program.
Thank you, Mike. Any other questions? All right, that will close out the CEO report, and we will move on to legislative updates, which is Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Pfeiffer.
All right, thank you. I'll kick this off, and then I'll look to Jeff and Dina to fill in the pieces I've missed. So a lot's happened in the last month and a half, as we've alluded to earlier in this meeting. What we'd like to do today is provide you, our board members, anyone watching at home, as well as our staff, a little bit more of a summary and a rundown of what's happened, particularly coming from President Trump's executive orders, with a focus on those decisions that have sort of a clearer ramification for this agency or our customers. I want to state up front as we go through this, we don't profess to have a lot of answers. There are way more questions right now, and I think a lot of us are in that space. Patience is going to be necessary, I know. And I thank you in advance for it as we all wait to see how a lot of these things turn out. But we are going to work to keep you and our staff and the public up to date. And the last thing, just as an introductory comment, I want to reassure you, our staff, and customers, there has been no executive order, no change at the federal government at this point that is causing us to make any change to our services, to our staffing, to our pay. None of that is changing. It is very much steady on at TheRide. We're definitely keeping an eye on a lot of these things, and they do have implications. I'm going to go through them as quickly as I can. But I do want to reassure everyone that no sudden changes, no immediate effects for our services or customers or staff. So as the Trump administration came in, I don't need to probably tell you, they had a number of executive orders that were released very, very quickly, and they continue to come out. A few of the things that are relevant really for this agency. First of all, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The administration has taken a very strong stand on what we colloquially call DEI. Numerous reversals of longstanding equity programs within the federal government. Their argument is that effectively these programs constitute illegal reverse discrimination. They're preference programs targeted to a particular group and contrary to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They have directed the immediate elimination of numerous internal federal programs, programs that contractors use, and they are moving very quickly into requiring anyone accepting grants from the federal government to take similar steps to remove illegal discrimination in their terms. We are a grantee, so I expect very soon we will see ramifications of this reach us. Anything appearing to be providing preferential treatment is being targeted. So this includes longstanding things like environmental justice provisions, which were signed into law by, or executive actions by President Clinton. Contractor requirements signed in as executive orders by President Johnson, 1965, were reversed. Programs that have just been a long part of the woodwork, affirmative action, disadvantaged business enterprise, equal employment opportunities, and more recent things like Justice 40, which was a Biden initiative, are all being immediately eliminated. On top of that, as you may know, federal staff associated with those programs are being let go and their employment terminated. We have been reviewing all of our internal paperwork, hiring, HR material. Right now, we do not believe any of these executive orders really don't have an immediate impact on us. We believe we are compliant today with the intent of these, and that's because we always adhered very strictly to the letter of the law. We don't really have any preferential programs of any of the sort that might be treated here. But even this afternoon, we were listening to a industry webinar, which if I can, I'll share with you. It is a strong effort on the part of the administration to eliminate these programs. I'll just say that. Immigration, moving on. As we all know, the administration has a strong position on immigration and folks who are not legally allowed in the country. We have double-checked all our staff's I-9 forms. Everyone we employ that we offer jobs to, it's conditional on them supplying this. So we were not surprised to check their paperwork and find out everyone's legal. So we're not really worried about that. However, I will share with you, we do have staff who are foreign nationals who are on various work permits that have, sunset provisions. So if laws change, we could be affected in that way. I'm also really sorry to share with you something I just heard yesterday that, we have drivers of all races, and some of them are, not Caucasian, and some passengers have been saying some hurtful things to them in the vein of immigration and their legal status. I only found out about this yesterday. I'm deeply disturbed by it. George and I are going to have some conversations about customer code of conduct and what, if any, latitude I have with regard to freedom of speech issues there, because that ain't right. Related to immigration, the administration is pretty directly saying that they intend to withhold federal grant funding from sanctuary cities who will not help them enforce immigration law. This is very unclear in terms of what this means, who qualifies as a sanctuary city, what this would mean. I could not tell you if Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, or Washtenaw County would fall into that category. If they do, and if that does proceed, it is entirely possible that we could get lumped in with decisions that are beyond our control. And some other government organization could take a position that could affect our funding, and we would just be sort of lumped into the whole community. And I'd refer to the name of the agency to just sort of highlight how we will be associated, or with whom we will be associated. It's out there. Funding, there's a lot been going on about funding. TheRide receives about 80% of our annual capital funds from the federal government. None of our operating funds, that's why I know people's paychecks are safe and services continue, but capital funds, major equipment, durable goods, facilities, buses, software, computer equipment, furniture, all of these things are capitalized. Most of that funding comes through automatic formula grants from the federal government. Thus far, those have not been affected. We're continuing to draw those dollars down normally. We are seeing a lot of changes in the discretionary competitive grant space. These are the competitive grants. The obvious one is the $25 million Low-No grant we won just 6-7 months ago. We are still working through proper channels, Nina is leading it, to get that project obligated. This is a paperwork thing that under most administration transitions is kind of a formality. It is definitely not a formality here. The Trump administration, one of the things they are very not excited about is anything that looks like climate action. They are actively removing a lot of funding for electric vehicles, chargers in many ways. And they have one executive order that came out very quickly, tried to freeze many grants, including those for the Green New Deal. The problem is there is no Green New Deal. That's not a statutory term. It was more of a rhetorical PR thing that was being used a couple of years ago. So it's not immediately clear what that refers to. The Low-No grant program existed long before the Biden administration. It's been around for 15 years. Will that count? We simply don't know. We're continuing to make slow, steady progress. It's also fairly clear that the administration is paused almost all grants moving forward. Everything is getting a different level of scrutiny and getting a review that it doesn't typically do. The degree of this pause and how long it will continue is not clear. You may recall we did mention after we won the award that something like this could happen. I am afraid to say that, yeah, we're kind of stuck, pinched in this moment. Dina and I went back and looked at our timetables. There was nothing we could have done. Everything was out of our hands in terms of the timing that this would have taken. And it might not have mattered, even if it had been obligated. Trump has frozen those funds as well. I will say the lawsuits are already piling up. There are lots coming in here. I think a district court has already sort of a stay on some of these things. I think it was out of Rhode Island. The Trump administration is appealing this. You've heard me say impoundment before. This is all gearing up towards a real test of presidential authority and constitutional parameters about the branches of government. I'm sure it's heading towards the Supreme Court, and it will take a long time to sort out whether or not our funding in this discretionary grant program, the Low-No award, will be available to us before that resolution, I could not tell you. Future discretionary grants. I feel like I'm just Debbie Downer today. I do apologize. Future discretionary grants. They've not released any new grant announcements, though they're called Notice of Funding Opportunities, or NOFOs, if you will. And they are basically the starting pistol of, okay, here's the grant, prepare to submit your application. They've just paused it all. They're not taking any new ones. All the programs themselves are being reviewed. The administration's ordered all references to climate change, the cost of carbon, DEI, all of these things expunged from all of these programs. They're all being retooled in this way. They will likely be reissued at some point with new strings attached, as the federal government has always had the authority to do. And we expect those strings to include anti-DEI language and language that obligates us even more firmly to help enforce immigration enforcement to the extent we could in any regard. There are provisions in our existing grants that may obligate us to do these sorts of things anyway. The feds write into their contracts escape hatches for themselves in terms of we can change any part of this at any time. Our priorities may change. We reserve the right to change the scope of your project. So they hold a lot of the cards, and they're being used. As I've mentioned, lots of lawsuits already beginning. We'll see how this unfolds over the next several months. Another thing we're looking at is a mention in a DOT document signed by the new Secretary of Transportation. It's a statement. It's not clear to us what it's intended for, but or if it's an action item. But it basically says that federal funding should not be used for local priorities and should only be used for things that of a national interest. In Project 2025 documents, this was associated with eliminating all federal transit funding, period, the entire FTA. Back to some earlier comments. That idea is not new. It has been circulated in certain quadrants of the conservative movement in Washington, D.C. for many years. I would point out that Congress really likes to use federal money to fund local projects, infrastructure projects of all sorts. This wasn't specific to transit. It could be roads, it could be airports, it could be any matter of things. And so I have to imagine Congress might object to that stipulation. The 5-year Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill is the big bill where they authorize all the funding levels for the next 5 years of transportation funding, including transit. Will expire in 2026. It will be updated and renegotiated later this year, probably before the end of the calendar year. Positioning on this has already begun. Conferences are being held in DC about what are your positions. People are assembling their speaking notes and their wish lists and this sort of thing. So we're definitely a part of that. Regulations. The administration is definitely pushing hard to cut red tape. They've issued a freeze on rules, trying to walk back as many as they can. No immediate impact to us, although possibly it might make it easier for us to build infrastructure. There are some things where they kind of want to eliminate some red tape, or what they call red tape. What they call red tape may include the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, which I suspect could raise some concerns locally. Dodge and layoffs. Don't worry, I'm getting to the end. I apologize. A lot of federal employees being laid off in many departments. The FTA was not spared this. They may have lost up to 10% of their total staffing in this first push. It's a pretty high attrition rate. We know Region 5 has lost people. We don't know who or how many. We don't know what the ramifications of this are going to be, but it's probably not going to speed things up in terms of getting paperwork through the FTA. Trade and tariffs. Number of executive orders on this space, number of number of things going on with trades and tariffs. Suppliers in our industry are nervous. Aluminum, steel, other just general import tariffs. The ramifications of this one would take a while to figure out. The ones on Canada and Mexico, I think, have been delayed for a little while, but maybe not entirely. I can't keep up, to be honest, with everything. The potential for it to lead to more inflation, I think, is very reasonable. It's a real possibility, and shortages are a possibility. Okay, what next? Well, we are watching very closely the federal government's continuing resolution funding its own operations. They don't have a budget. They're operating on an extension called a continuing resolution, which expires in mid-March. March 14th. People are talking that the chances of a federal government shutdown are increasing, simply because the politics are such that it makes that sort of brinksmanship very likely. We are expecting a lot of litigation over impoundment. As I mentioned, this is probably a constitutional issue, go to Supreme Court. Don't know how long it'll take to overdo that. We're noticing people starting to talk about how to react to a lot of this, and noting that there are inconsistencies between states and federal priorities now. For example, the state of California has mandated that all transit agencies in California be zero emissions by, I think, 2030. Now the primary source of funding for that is in question. Is California going to backstop that with state funding? Are they going to cut transit agencies some slack? We don't know how that's going to unfurl. We'll have to wait and see. What are we doing? Well, we're monitoring this very closely. We are a small fish in a very big pond, but we're watching it very closely. We're learning from our peers. We're learning from other APTA members, even today, picking up new implications on some of these things. We're working through channels to get that low-no grant obligated. We do have some hope that, I don't want to make it sound like that's a lost cause. I still think we'll see something out of that. And we're continuing to draw down our federal funds. I also want to reassure everyone, this is some big stuff that's being kicked around, not just in the transit industry. There's bigger things going on. I don't want to make us sound like the center of the universe, but we shouldn't panic. As Mike was saying earlier, this agency is in a very solid, I think was the term you used, financial position. We are in better shape to weather disruptions than many other organizations. So we intend to continue to be there for our customers, for our staff, to get them where they need to go, to employ them on a regular basis. So I want to reassure everyone, as I said at the beginning, no immediate impacts to the agency or our services. We're not changing fares. We're not slowing down all the initiatives we're working on. I need to reiterate to everyone that the agency does not tolerate harassment from our passengers or between our staff on any level. We are very aware within our community and within our team, we have people who would look at all this information that I've just shared and be horrified, and other people who might celebrate. And we have all of these different perspectives in our family, broadly speaking, and we need to respect that. So in closing, just a reiteration, this stuff we're keeping an eye on. It's a starting point. The sky is not falling. We shouldn't overreact. We're in a very strong position. We need to wait and see what all of this will share out. So with that, I'm going to look to Dina and Jeff and say, is there anything you would add? Okay. Any good news? So with that, sorry, yeah, that was a real pessimistic thing. I wish I had better news. So with that, Madam Chair, happy to answer any questions or take you to the bar, whichever is more appropriate.
That was a lot.
Sorry.
I'm going to open it up to the floor. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Matt with regards to what he just shared? Jesse?
Maybe, something you mentioned that, it's possible if new grant opportunities were to arise, that they might carry some strings, that might could potentially go against our values. And, just want to put it in the minds, I'm glad that you're paying attention to this, and I hope that, I will look for further information. We may want to, if it looks like that's the kind of thing that might happen, we as a board might want to consider policy that would provide guidance to staff on how to approach grants that carry conditions that would have, for us, unwanted outcomes. Obviously, nothing to talk about at the moment, but that was just a thought that occurred to me as you were talking about that.
Thank you for pointing that out. Any other questions or comments? Rich?
This did remind me, and I can't remember if I sent it out to the entire board or just the exec committee. I had a task last board meeting to map out polling stations to bus stops. That is complete. So if I forgot to send it out to the entire board, let me know and I'll resend it out.
And I'm wondering too, we can hold on to that. You can send it out for people to read, but I believe that would be an excellent dialogue from when we are looking at our ends, because that's when that discussion first came up. So I'm keeping a list of things that have come up over the last few months with regards to ends, and that was one of them. So we will be entertaining those discussions with Sue Radwan. But if you can get that information out ahead of time, that would be great. Any questions or concerns for Matt regarding the update, the federal government update?
Just real quick, Kathleen, so wanted to provide a very high-level update in Lansing, not to add too much more to the plate, but just want to give people a heads up that budget conversations are starting to take place in Lansing very early on in the process. Earlier this month, Governor Whitmer unveiled her budget recommendations, which was then followed the following week with a roads plan that we're happy to say did include an increased funding to public transit. Obviously, very early conversations. I believe she's set to give the state of the state on February 26th. Lansing is dealing with a lot of negotiations and a lot of issues right now, but did just want to share that with everyone that those conversations are very rudimentary, but are starting to take place. Budgets typically passed, I believe July 3rd, July 4th is the deadline to have a budget passed for the state of Michigan.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll close out this discussion and we will move on to action item recap. Deb?
I just had one thing noted, that I'll be updating the policy manual and sending it out to all of you with the update to 212 and the removal of 2131.
Thank you. Topics for next meeting, we'll be hearing the fiscal year 25 quarterly one service report, global executive limitations 2.0, financial conditions and activities 2.5, cash and investments 2.6. I think what we're doing is we're ramping up to the beginning of budget season and running into the corporate business plan and all of that. Is that why these are all coming up at once? We can remove board annual plan of work. We put that to bed this evening. And in the future, determining reasonableness, like I said, the governance committee is going to be meeting next week, and we will hopefully have this wrapped up and it'll be coming to the full board soon. And then ridership and coverage, which is also on our annual plan of work that we've left to Matt to try to sort of figure out and answer our questions. Moving on, we'll move to public comment. Deb, does there happen to be anybody in the gallery online?
We have no one for public comment.
Very good. We'll close out public comment and we will move to adjournment. I will entertain a motion. Don't all jump at once. Was that Simi over there? Simi makes a motion. Rich seconded. I'm sure we don't want to discuss the motion, but just in case, does anybody want to discuss it? All right. All in favor, raise your hands. Very good. Thank you so much to staff and to the board of directors tonight. Excellent job.